remove the sternocleidomastoid, and it's sitting right there close to the surface. So very, very easy to access. And again, this is why when you choke somebody, the choking can cut off airflow through the throat area. But when you squeeze in to choke off airflow, it also will damage the phrenic nerve, making it harder for the diaphragm to function properly. And that facilitates that person passing out and dying from that motion anyway. This is also why the Vulcan sleeper hold puts people to sleep. So if you watch Star Trek movies, Vulcans just have to pinch the neck there to put someone to sleep. It's because Vulcans have stronger muscles than humans because their blood is copper-based instead of iron-based. But when you pinch right here, if you can pinch deep enough, you can pinch the phrenic nerve and cause it to spasm and causing the diaphragm to spasm and not breathe properly, causing them to pass out. So that's how the Vulcan sleep grip works if you watch your Star Trek.
If you hit them right there on that nerve, will that also cause...
If you hit it hard enough, it can cause it to misfire, which could cause the person to pass out, but you'd have to hit it really hard to do that.
I punched my buddy in training right there, and he just fell asleep. I was like, what just happened?
And you're like, whoa, awkward.
Yeah.
Now, the downside is not only do you have that bad boy right there for the breathing, but you also have these major blood vessels coming up, like the carotid artery, jugular vein. So when you hit the phrenic nerve, there's also a good chance you're going to hit the carotid artery, jugular vein, which also disrupts blood going to the brain. So ironically, that whole trinity of everything that can kill you is really close together, just 1 inch underneath your skin.
Wow.
I know, we're not always the well-built kind of structures. You think you want to protect things like that, but whatever, close enough. Okay. Back in the day when we used to get a lot of training because of active shooting and all that crap, because that happens all the time, one of our active shooting guys, his thing was, there's not a part on the body you can't bite off. And we're like, this is what we're learning in our training? We're biting off pieces? But he said, a bite to the neck right here, if you get a good enough grip, you can bite all the way down to the phrenic nerve and the carotid artery and rip, causing death of that person. If you desperately had to kill somebody with their face.
Vampire move?
Yeah. There you go. Vampire moves are actually inaccurate. They don't even bite anywhere near the carotid. They bite higher up or they'll over here. Because if you're a vampire, you don't want to kill your prey usually. You want to keep them around for a while so you can keep going back for snacks. All right. Shocking. Scary movies aren't always accurate. All right. Brachial plexus, anterior roots of the spinal nerves for the lower cervical, so C6 through T1, are going to make up your brachial plexus. It is going to lie anterior base of the neck, just superior to the clavicle. This is also one of those things, if you might notice when you watch TV shows or real life, when someone's getting choked, they don't usually fight back very efficiently, like they're flopping their arms around and you're just like, poke them in the eye, do something, fight back. If you squeeze down hard enough, it can disrupt neural impulses to the upper limbs so they can't fight back properly. So it's all in how you choke somebody, how efficient it's going to be either for disrupting the phrenic nerve up here or disrupting the neural impulses to the arms so they can't fight back properly. So it's a matter of a couple of centimeters difference there. So the nerves here, again, are going to go to the skin, the muscles of the upper appendages. After the axilla, they're all pretty superficial, which can be problematic. That means that you can injure them quite easily, causing paralysis or damage to that nerve and functionality of that nerve. So again, not very well built when you think of needing to protect your bits and pieces. Now we have 5 major nerves that come from the brachial plexus. So here's our brachial plexus and his little jazz hand showing you his nerves. Okay, so brachial plexus, there's that first rib to show you that positioning. Okay. So our axillary nerve is going to go to the axillary part, the armpit area, and it's going to go to the shoulder joint. It's going to go to the deltoid. So if we damage the axillary nerve, we would have paralysis with our deltoid. We'd have problems rotating our shoulder, rotator cuff muscles. Musculocutaneous nerve is going to go to the structures of the anterior upper arm. So going to the biceps brachii, going to the brachialis, so damage to the musculocutaneous nerve, you wouldn't be able to flex your forearm. The median nerve is going to supply the anterior forearm going along the thumb side of things. And any injury to that is going to make it hard to use your pincher grasp. So the median nerve is going to go to the flexor carpi radialis, those little guys, a little bit to the palmaris longus, and it's going to help you move your thumb, your ring finger, your your middle finger, and a little bit half of your ring. So it said pointy instead of ring finger. So these guys, when you pinchy, you'll notice your ring finger wants to come to, but it's not all the way there because he's only halfway controlled by the median nerve. So if we damage that, we can't use a pincher grasp. So this often is something we see with wrist slashing. So how can they tell a suicide versus a homicide with the wrist slash? If you cut the wrist, if both of the median nerves are severed, that is impossible for an individual to do because they wouldn't be able to hold the knife to do the cuts. Okay, so that's usually an indicator that that was a homicide to look like a suicide. If one of the nerves is severed, then you know that was the last one cut. So the shallow cut was first, the deeper cut was second. And of course, obviously, if they're both intact, that could be that suicide. If you've watched the movie Constantine, anybody? Keanu Reeves, pretty movie. So again, Constantine slashes his wrist to get Satan's attention. And when he tries to light a cigarette, he can't do the lighter. And Satan's like, oh, when you cut yourself, you cut too deep and you sever the nerve. He's talking about the median nerve. So he wasn't able to use his lighter because of that. Ulnar nerve, going to go to the anterior forearm on the ulna side of things, so along the pinky side. So you would be looking at a little bit of the palmaris longus and, of course, the flexor carpi ulnaris, that little guy there. And it's going to be the other half of the ring finger and the pinky. Okay, so whenever those guys close, they help us to make a fist. Okay, so if we have damage to the ulnar nerve, we wouldn't be able to close our hands. So we wouldn't be able to make a fist. Or if you were holding something and hit your ulnar nerve, you might drop it because it would open up the pinky and the ring finger. This is what some people call the funny bone. And it gets called that because it pops out at the bottom of the humerus going down by the ulna. So that's where the funny comes from. Radial nerve does the posterior upper arm, so it's going to go to the triceps brachii. It's going to go to the posterior forearm, so all of your extensors, extensor digitorum, extensor carpi radialis longus, brevis, blah, 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 and the back of the hand along the thumb side. Injury to this is going to cause wrist drop, so you look like Mr. Burns from The Simpsons. Okay, so he might have had damage to his radial nerve. This is one of the reasons why you have to have a crutch that is fitted to you. If you put crutches on, the radial nerve is the last one to pop out at the bottom of the armpit area. So if you sit on crutches wrong, it can damage. So a lot of people are like, oh, it really hurts to use a crutch. It's like, yeah, it's not fitted to you. You just can't go buy some at a garage sale and hope for the best. They have to fit your height and your weight. Because if you press too much on the radial nerve, it can cause permanent damage and you won't be able to lift and do extension properly. You'd just be stuck in the flex position. So here's our little hands. So here's our median nerve with the thumb, the finger, the pointer finger, the middle finger, and half of the ring. Ulnar, all of your pinky, and about half of your ring finger. And then the radial, just kind of the back part of the thumb area. So if you sleep funny and you wake up the next day and your pinky is tingling, you know the way you slept pinched your ulnar nerve. And it's causing it to misfire. So that's why the pinky might, when you wake up, might be tingly or might be asleep or kind of numb because if you slept on it wrong and pinched that nerve. So if you have those issues when you sleep, especially if you sleep with an arm up on your side, you might notice when you wake up, you can't feel it. It's because you've pinched the brachial plexus in that bend there by putting pressure on it. So you can now identify which one you bent. So I can give you something fun to do in the morning, I guess. There's the dude in his brachial plexus. So fairly close to the surface. Again, they just removed the platysma and the sternocleidomastoid and the pectoralis major. And you can see all those guys very easily. So brachial plexus, there's your axillary nerve going here. Axillary nerve, axillary. Musculocutaneous nerve, then our median, ulnar, and then you move all those guys out of the way, and the radial nerves in the back. Lumbar plexus, found in your lumbar nerves, L1 through L4. They're going to combine and sit in the posterior part of the psoas muscle, which was one of those muscles we didn't have to know in lab. So it's associated with the upper blades of the ilium area. Now we have three big branches off of the lumbar. Now, the lumbar controls basically 3 out of 4 sides of your thighs. Your thighs are very big, has very big muscles. You need a lot of control for those very big muscles. So the femoral nerve is going to go to the skin and muscles of the anterior thigh. So it's going to go to the rectus femoris. It's going to go to the vastus medialis, vastus lateralis. The lateral cutaneous nerve on the side is going to go to the skin and muscles of the upper lateral thigh. So you're looking at the gluteus muscles. You're looking at the tensor fasciae latae, those guys. The obitur nerve, I'm not going to point to it, but it's on the inside, medial part of the thigh. So it's going to go to the pectineus, adductor longus, adductor magnus. Those guys basically in the crotch area of your jeans. So there's our lumbar plexus. Lumbar plexus. Lumbar plexus. So we can see the femoral nerve coming down, going to the front, dealing with the quads, and a little bit going down this way. Not a big deal there. So there's our obitur. It's called that because it pops through the obitur foramen, that hole, going to those medial muscles. Same thing. This is just from the front. And there's a dude, and you can actually see those big nerves going down there. Sacral plexus, lower lumbar, upper sacral, so L4 through S4. They're going to sit in the middle portion of the false pelvis or greater pelvis. So that's the part where the between the two ilia, that spread there. The major nerve from this area is the sciatic nerve. So most of us have probably heard of the sciatic nerve. A lot of people may have sciatica or issues. That's this big boy, and it's one of the biggest nerves popping out physically. It's huge. So it is going to give 3 big branches that go to the lower limb. So we're going to have the back of the thigh. So your thighs require 4 different control mechanisms, essentially. And then it's going to go to below the knee. So there's our sciatic nerve. Very big boy. Okay? Huge. Okay? Same thing here. You can see 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, all going to make up that sciatic nerve. Okay? So a lot of big guys coming through. So your hamstring nerve comes off of the sciatic nerve in the thigh, going to the skin and muscles of the posterior thigh, so the hamstrings, semitendinosus, membranosus, biceps femoris. This nerve is actually a part of the tibial nerve that kind of branches off a little early, so that's why it's in quote marks. Now the tibial nerve branches off just above the knee, and it's going to supply skin and muscles of the knee joint as well as the posterior leg. So it's going to go to the gastrocnemius and the soleus, to help you with your, standing on your tippy toes, stuff like that. It also goes to the bottom of your foot. So if your feet are ticklish, it's your tibial nerve that's very sensitive. Common perineal nerve. Now, again, perineal and fibular are often interchangeable. Kind of like we learned the term peroneus instead of saying fibularis longus, fibularis brevis, fibularis tertius. So some books will say common perineal nerve, some will say common fibular nerve. They are interchangeable with those terms. Okay, so this is going to pop off above the knee, continuing down the leg, giving branches that go to the skin and muscles of the anterior and the lateral portion of the leg, including the foot. So that's going to go to the anterior tibialis muscle, the extensor digitorum longus muscle, and a little bit of the peroneus muscle, dorsiflexion and stuff. So here they are in our colors. So there's our tibial nerve, okay, being all kind of purpley and tickly. The fibular nerve, again, this is what they're calling the common fibular nerve, so the top part of your foot. So if the bottom part of your foot falls asleep, then you know you've pinched the tibial nerve, usually because your legs are crossed and you're pinching it behind your knee, behind the knee and whatever you're resting behind the knee on, usually the other knee. And then the fibular nerve, you might lose the top part. Saphenous and sural are branches off of branches that we're not going to concern ourselves with. So there's your sciatic nerve. So he's a big old boy. And again, this is the back side of the body. So you can see why it's so easy to pinch. It sits right between big bony areas like the lesser trochanter and the ischial tuberosity. So if you sit wrong or just lean too far, it can pinch on that sciatic nerve, causing issues with butt numbness or back of your leg numbness or the back of your thigh numbness or feet, that kind of scenario. Same thing, just without those little muscles there. So it goes all the way down. There's again. And there's the tibial nerve going to the bottom so you can tickle the feet. Your intercostal nerve. So the thoracic nerves T2 through T11 or T12 are not arranged in a plexus. Here, instead of helping each other to control the body, we just have nerves going directly to the muscles. Because of that, sometimes it's harder to coordinate these. So a lot of times when you exercise, you'll hear people complain how they're trying to engage their abs, but it's kind of hard to do. It's really easy to figure out how to bend your knee, but trying to engage your abs and your core might be a little bit harder. And that's because we don't have a cluster of nerves working together to control your abs. You just have individual nerves doing that. So they don't have a backup system there. Now, for whatever reason, some books will say T11. Some books will say T12. T12 is never a part of a plexus. So it should always be included in those intercostal nerves. But for whatever reason, some books just, I guess, pretend T12 doesn't exist. I don't know what T12 did to them. Okay, so sometimes you'll see it listed or not. So they're going to go to the intercostal muscles. They're going to go to the abdominal muscles. And again, this is one of the reasons why your intercostal muscles and your abdominal muscles are weaker muscles in general compared to those other big boys that you exercise, harder to engage and work with because they don't have multiple nerves to help control them within the plexus. They just have individual spinal nerves going. Now, within the plexuses, those nerve fibers are to crisscross and redistribute. So again, when we looked at the sciatic nerve, it's going to have some L4, L5, S1, S2, S3, all going into that sciatic nerve. That's a safety mechanism. If you hurt your back and you sever L5, you don't have to worry about having paralysis in that leg because you can't control any of the muscles anymore. The other guys, if L5 is damaged, L4, S1, S2, S3 can help pick up the slack. So you may have weakness in your hamstrings or weakness in your calf, but you won't be completely paralyzed with your hamstring or completely paralyzed with your calf. So with those nerves crisscrossing and redistributing, it's a backup mechanism because we don't want to have an injury take you completely out. So in this case, if there was an injury, you would just end up with muscle weakness instead of muscle paralysis. Okay, so lots of backup systems in your body, and this is one of those, and one of the reasons why we do those plexuses. All right, switching gears to organization neurons and how they're working together. So looking at neuronal pools. So neuronal pools are a functional group. Okay, so not that they're connected together physically, but they're connected together via their function, their job. So functional group of neurons that integrate incoming information received from multiple sources. They work like think tanks. So if you've seen think tanks, we'll see them a lot in advertising and product placement. So it's kind of like when vanilla Coke first hit the market, it was really cheap or free, and they just wanted you to tell people how you felt about it. Okay, what do you feel about vanilla Coke? Or the Doritos Locos Tacos, they just wanted you to fill out a survey about it. So sometimes when we get a brand new product, one of the easiest things to do is product testing. You let a group of people test your product, use your product, they tell you your opinion, and then you have somebody that takes all those opinions and comes up with a summary. So the president of Coca-Cola did not know how much you personally hated vanilla Coca-Cola, but he got a summary of what most people felt about it. Okay, so you're not going to have individual people talking to the president of the company. You just have a summary of that entire group. That's how neuronal pools work. We don't want to have one neuron distracting the entire brain. So if you've got a little neuron coming from your toe that says the seam of my sock is really annoying today, that signal is going to get put into a neuronal pool, and the what's going on in your feet is going to be summarized. So that one little annoying seam isn't going to cause you or get a distraction that might make you have a car accident because you're not paying attention because the seam of your sock is so distracted. Right? We don't want one neuron to mess up your whole day. Okay, so we put them in a neuronal pool and we come up with summaries. So each individual neuron doesn't always get to put their case forward, gets to talk to the brain directly. They just have a summary of what's going on in the body today, what's going on with your feet, what's going on with your knees, and we give you a summary aspect. Okay, so that's what these neuronal pools do. They're connection neurons, so they're in the spinal cord, in the brain, and they're just collecting information and forwarding information if it's important. So neural circuits. These are the patterns of synaptic connections in neuronal pools. So how are they connected to each other? And how they are connected to each other is going to affect their functionality. So if these two guys can't talk to each other, obviously they're not going to function together. Now we have 5 different types of neural circuits, how these different neuronal pools can communicate within each other and between each other. Our first ones are divergent circuits. Divergent circuits where we're going to increase the number of neurons or neuronal pools that are involved. So 1 is going to tell 2, and 2 is going to tell 4, and 4 is going to tell 8. It's going to get bigger and bigger. It's kind of like high school, and someone has a secret in the morning, but by the afternoon, everybody knows in high school, right? Rumors spread. That's how these guys work. They're often referred to as an amplifying circuit because we're telling more and more and more of the brain, of the spinal cord about what's going on. They are actually fairly common in both sensory and motor systems. So as an example, your sense of vision. So when you see things, you've got a signal coming in from the optic nerve from your eye. That signal is going to diverge. Some of it's going to go to the occipital lobe so you can pick out the color and the shape of the image that you're looking at. Some of it's going to go to the general interpretive so you can read if there's a word that's written in that color and that shape. You're going to have them go to the different areas of the cerebrum for conscious processing. But at the same time, some of it's actually going to go to the cerebellum so we can see what the horizon is doing. So you can know if your head is tilted or if you're spinning or if you're sitting still, stuff like that. So we can not only use vision as visual cues and all the different parts of the brain that picks up visual stuff, but we can also use it to help with this balance and equilibrium. So diverging out that information. Converging is the opposite of diverging. So 4 telling 2, 2 telling 1. So we're getting less and less and less involvement. This allows different motor neurons to be controlled at both the conscious and subconscious level. So even though you can consciously tell your biceps brachii how to contract, I want to, bend my elbow, we have a lot of subconscious things going to it, telling it how to contract, not so much that it hurts yourself, but not too little so you can pick up the thing that you're picking up, contract enough so we can have good balance and equilibrium without throwing us off center. So we're going to have a lot of input going into just that one communication with that muscle. Another example of that would be breathing. When we breathe, again, that's all coming down through the phrenic nerve to the diaphragm. Now, from the brain point of view, you've got the medulla that's going to set up breathing in and breathing out. And then you're going to have the pons. One part of the pons is going to encourage you to breathe in. One part of the pons is going to encourage you to breathe out. So those guys are tag teaming each other. And of course, you can consciously hold your breath if you want to. And that's going to override everything coming from the medulla and the pons because your cerebrum goes, I want to hold my breath right now. Okay? So those different areas of the brain all communicate through the phrenic nerve to that diaphragm to tell it to contract or not contract. Reverberation circuits, these are sometimes referred to as oscillating circuits. They work like positive feedback mechanisms. They just keep the process going. So it's very just keep swimming kind of circuit. So these circuits do things like help maintain consciousness. So when you're awake, you're not walking and pass out because you fell asleep. Okay? Hopefully you'll pass out, fall asleep while you're listening to lecture, that kind of scenario. So as long as you're conscious, you're hopefully going to stay conscious. Normal breathing. Breathing in makes you breathe out. Breathing out makes you breathe in. When you breathe in, you got to breathe out. They're going to constantly go back and forth. So once you take that first breath when you're born, you're breathing for the rest of your life, right? Nobody takes classes in high school or college about breathing. Wouldn't that be nice? You're like, I'm going to have an easy A breathing class. My luck, they'd give you an essay or something. It's like, how did you fail breathing? Serial processing, this is just a relay. They're going to summarize and they're going to send it on the chain of command up to the brain. And then we have parallel. Parallel gives us multiple neurons or multiple neuronal pools that can process the information at the exact same time. So the signal comes in and you'll have different neuronal pools working at the same time so we can have a lot of responses to that same instance. This usually occurs with pain. Okay, so when you stub your toe, there will be one neuronal pool that will say, move your foot away from the coffee table. So you'll be moving your foot away from the coffee table. There will be a different group of neuronal pools that will say, this hurts. Tell me how bad. Okay. And you'll have another neuronal pool that will say, curse like a sailor. Okay. And all three of these things happen at the exact same time, right? You don't pull away, feel pain, then curse. No. As you're pulling away, it hurts, you're cursing. Okay. All of them are happening at the same time, but processed through different routes. So here they are in picture form. This makes you really want to be an artist because I'm pretty sure they got paid overpriced just by flipping the picture. Wow. So diverging, we're spreading out, telling more and more and more. Converging, we're narrowing, telling less and less and less. Reverberating, we just keep doing, just keep swimming, just keep swimming. And then our parallel, move away from the painful thing, feel the pain, curse about the pain. Takes a little bit more thought about cursing, what words to use, that kind of stuff. Questions, comments, questions? All right, reflex arcs. So if you remember way back in the first week, I know, crazy, right? It's like 6 weeks ago. We used to have, hopes and dreams. Okay. But that first week we talked about homeostasis and we talked about negative feedback loops. And I mentioned that we need to know it now because later when we get to the nervous system that controls a lot of our homeostasis, we're going to be seeing some of these exact same terms again, and we're just applying them to the nervous system. So today is that day. You're like, oh, great. So we got to hopefully remember the stuff that we learned back in the day. So a reflex arc is the simplest functional unit of the nervous system. Signal comes in, signal comes out. Don't even have to process, it just does. Okay. Now, a reflex by definition is a quick, jerky, involuntary response to a stimulus transmitted over a reflex arc. Now, even though it involves voluntary muscles, skeletal muscles, we don't voluntarily control reflexes. It's a reflex, they're just going to happen. Typically, they're a negative feedback. They're going to try to do the opposite of, they're trying to stop whatever's happening to them. Now, the reflexes listed, these are visceral reflexes. We're not going to spend time on those in A&P1 because we haven't been talking about organs. We've been talking about skeletal muscles. So in A&P1, we're going to concentrate on the somatic reflexes. But visceral reflexes, you'll get to in A&P2. Breathing. Breathing in makes you breathe out. Breathing out makes you breathe in. Urination. Urine in your bladder. Got to pee. Defecation. Poop in your bowel. Got to poop. Heart rate, digestion, all those are basic reflexes that you don't have to think about process. They're just going to happen. So the parts of the reflex arc. So these are those guys that we've already learned before. So a heat receptor picks up if it gets hot in here. We don't use those very often in these buildings. But the cold receptors get a bunch of workouts in these buildings, right? It's always freaking cold, right? Those cold receptors like, cool. We have our sensory or afferent neuron. They're going to send that signal from the receptor to the central nervous system, to the brain and spinal cord. The center, this is where the synapse is made. This is why the central nervous system is called the central nervous system. This is where all the centers are located within our reflex arcs. So here we're going to have a synapse. It might be a sensory neuron onto a motor neuron, or it might be a sensory neuron to a thinking neuron so we can think about what's going on before we have a reflex onto that motor neuron. So there may or may not be thinking in the center. The motor or efferent neuron carries the impulse away from the central nervous system, away from the brain, away from the spinal cord, going to the effector organs. And of course, the effector organ, that's the organ that's going to carry out the command. Is it a muscle, skeletal, cardiac, smooth? Is it a gland? What have you? So here's this guy. Apparently, they decided to pet attack, which you should not do because they bite. Okay. So it says, ow, this hurts. Comes in through that sensory neuron, cell body, the dorsal root ganglion, synapses onto the posterior great horn. There's an interneuron that says that hurts, stupid, you should stop touching it. And it's going to tell the somatic motor neuron with its cell body in the anterior great horn to go to the muscles as they contract to move away from that signal. Okay, so pretty straightforward little reflex. Similar to what we just got done dealing with in lab. Classification, you know it, we like it. Science likes to categorize and classify. So classification of our reflexes. We can classify them based on development. How do you get this reflex? So innate, you're born with. You don't have to be taught. It's going to happen naturally. So examples of innate reflexes would be things like moving away from pain, right? You don't have to teach your kid, honey, that hurts. You should stop touching it. No, they're going to stop, okay? Blinking. You don't have to poke your kid in their eyeball to teach them how to blink. It's a natural thing, right? Which is mildly annoying if you wear contacts because you have to overcome your innate reflex to blink when somebody's trying to touch your eyeball. Anybody else have to sneak up on their eyeballs in the morning? Like, look over there. Try to hope for the best. Okay. Acquired, we get it from somewhere. And the more we do it, the more it's going to be enhanced. So again, if you play catch with your kid, they might acquire the ability to catch a ball. And the more you play catch, the better they are at catching and the faster they're going to be able to catch it. I always think of Gina Davis in League of Their Own. Anybody watch that one?
No.
Like barehand catches that baseball right out of that person's face. Like, that's impressive. Okay. The rest of us have probably acquired the duck reflex because catching didn't work out too well, right? 2 for flinching. It's like you can't help but flinch because we've learned that pain hurts and we want to move away from it. Processing side, where is your center? Spinal reflexes have their center in the spinal cord. Cranial reflexes have their center in the brain. Example of some cranials, responses to light. So when it gets dark, your pupils are going to dilate to bring in more light. When it gets too bright outside, it's going to constrict to prevent too much light from coming into your eye. Noise, again, if something's real quiet, we tend to get closer to it, which is why if you have problems hearing, when you talk to somebody, eventually you're like all up in their face. You're like, I am so sorry, I'm so close. I'm just deaf, okay? Or if it's really loud, you lean away from it, okay? Responses, who's our effector organs? So somatic reflexes, that's going to be our voluntary, our skeletal muscles. So that's what we're going to concentrate in A&P1 are the somatic reflexes. Visceral reflexes, these are our autonomic reflexes. These are going to go to the smooth muscle, the cardiac muscle, the glands. We'll mention some of these when we get to the autonomic nervous system next week, but a lot of these we're going to be talking about more in A&P2 because that's when we're going to talk about breathing in the respiratory system and the heart beating in the cardiovascular center. So we'll be looking at these a lot through A&P2. How many playas we got? The complexity of the circuit. Monosynaptic means one synapse, so one sensory neuron synapsing onto one motor neuron, so only one gap, one synapse. Polysynaptic, more than one synapse. So you have a sensory neuron synapsing onto an interneuron, one synapse, that then synapse onto the motor neuron, synapse. So minimum of 2 synapses can include a lot more if it's a very complex reflex. And then we have control, which side is going to respond. So there are those fun 2 words that we had way back on week 1 when we were trying to figure out our language of anatomy sheets, and it took forever to find ipsilateral because the only place that it's mentioned is in this chapter dealing with this reflex. And you're like, oh, it doesn't even use it enough to make it as a definition in the back of the book. So ipsi meaning same and lateral means side, so same side. So if your left hand is on a hot stove, your left hand is going to move from the hot stove. Who cares about the right hand because it's not on fire? Contralateral, again, lateral still means side. Contra means opposite, right? Contradictory, contrary to popular belief. So opposite side. So if you get a stimulation on the left side, the right's going to respond. Many of us have acquired the bug slapping reflex, right? We feel a bug, we slap it without even thinking about it. Sometimes we've developed that reflex so well, we just randomly slap ourselves as somebody touches us by accident. Anybody else have ever done that? Wind blows, you're like, oh, that wasn't even a bug. I just hurt myself for no reason. Okay, so that's a very good acquired reflex. That's contralateral. So we're going to detail out our reflexes. So we're going to start with the monosynaptic reflexes, which are your simplest reflexes. Now, before we can actually talk about these reflexes, we have to step back a moment and go back to skeletal muscles. I know we thought we escaped, but we got to go back. When we were talking about skeletal muscles and skeletal muscle contractions, we were referring to the functionality of the extrafusal muscle fibers, the skeletal muscles that do the muscle contractions. Now, there are other skeletal muscle fibers that don't contract. Those are called intrafusal muscle fibers. You can think of them kind of like the undercover cops, okay? So that undercover cop, it appears like they're a drug dealer. They're acting all bad and stuff like they're a drug dealer, but they're not really a drug dealer. They're a narc, and they're going to tell on everything, right? We've all seen Undercover Cop and or Mission Impossible movies, the undercover guy, okay? That's what these intrafusal muscle fibers do. In case you were wondering, how does the brain know the muscle is contracting when you tell it to contract? How do you know the brain, how does the brain know the muscles relax? He's got spies. He's got these little narcs that are parked in your muscles that are telling, I'm stretched, I'm contracted, I'm relaxed, I'm doing nothing. They're spying on those skeletal muscles all the time. So as those muscles are doing their job, these intrafusal muscle fibers are telling the brain, yep, they're contracting like you told them to. Okay? Okay, so they're always going to spy on your skeletal muscles. Now, since they're spies, they're not real drug dealers. They're fake drug dealers. They're not really going to break the law, so they're not going to contract. They don't have myofilaments, so they don't have actin or myosin or any of the structures that we looked at with our skeletal muscle. They are non-contractile. They're just there acting as a sensory agent for the brain, so they're spying. Now, a lot of times they'll refer to them as spindle cells because they are shaped slightly different because they are not contracting and not contractile. So they are kind of chunky in the middle. Now, they have two different ways they communicate signals to the brain, two different ways that it tells what the skeletal muscle is doing. One are your primary sensory endings. Primary sensory endings are stimulated by the rate and the amount of stretch. So the primary is going to say, I'm stretching fast. I'm stretching slow. I'm contracting hard. I'm contracting soft. They're just going to give you the big overview of what we're doing. The secondary gives us the actual degree. I'm stretched 50%. I'm contracted 99%. Okay? This is so the brain knows what's going on. Because if this intrafusal muscle fiber says, hey, I'm contracting really fast, and I've already contracted 99%, the brain needs to put a brake on that contraction, because if it contracts more than 99%, if it contracts 105%, you could tear something, right? Yes, overcontract can cause damage. So we want to pump the brakes. We're like, all right, we're contracting pretty fast and we're at 87%. Let's start slowing it down now, right? Yellow light, slow down until we stop that contraction. So I mentioned zombies and their superhuman strength and stuff because their brain isn't working right before. Mm-hmm. Okay. This is what's not paying attention with zombies. So when you go to do a movement, your brain will say, okay, you are using your strength to open this structure. You should stop now so you don't pull a muscle. You should stop now so you don't injure yourself, because that secondary goes, I'm contracted 99%. Tell me to stop. If you're a zombie, the brain that controls your muscles doesn't listen to the intrafusal muscle fibers, and it just keeps on contracting. So a zombie could contract so hard it could rip its own limb off because there's no safety mechanism there. And that's what we see a lot on those zombie movies, right? They go to rip something off and they tear themselves because they don't have that spy network that they're listening to. Okay, so because of these spy networks, it prevents us from over-contracting. It prevents us from getting too strong by developing and having too much contraction force within those muscles. Okay, so it's safety. Make sure we don't go too crazy. Now, this is how the intrafusal muscle fiber is talking to the brain, telling the brain what the muscles are doing. The brain also needs to talk to them, right? When you've got an undercover cop, you have a handler that's telling them, okay, lead the investigation this way, or here's some money so you can pretend to buy drugs, that scenario. So the neuron that communicates to the intrafusal muscle fibers, the handler, is known as a gamma efferent fiber. Alpha efferent fibers are the ones that are part of the neuromuscular junction that's releasing acetylcholine to the extrafusal muscle fibers so we can contract. Our gammas are going to keep telling the spindle fibers, those intrafusal muscle fibers, keep telling me what's going on. Keep communicating with me. Just like the handler, here's some more money, keep buying the drugs. Okay, so they're going to constantly be in contact with the brain by sending signals. And they're always going to receive signals back from the brain to confirm what's happening, to make sure we keep talking. So here's our players. So these are the extrafusal muscle fibers, the ones that we concentrated on for test 3 that do the contracting. And these are the alpha motor neurons that have the neuromuscular junction releasing acetylcholine so we can have muscle contraction. Our little spies look a little different if you look close enough. They look more like spindle fibers, and they don't have any of those stripes. They don't have myofilaments, but they do have sensory. So they've got the primary coming in saying, I'm contracting fast, I'm contracting slow, I'm stretching fast, I'm stretching slow. And then they've got the secondary, I've contracted 50%, I've contracted 75%, or I'm relaxed 50% or 75%. So that way the brain can know what the muscle is doing every single moment and tell it to contract more or less based on those conditions, based on what is being told by the intrafusal muscle fibers. Okay. Because you can't know what your muscles are doing without a spy to tell you what the muscles are doing. And that's their job, is to spy. Okay. Now, the spies play a role in all of your reflexes because they're the ones that are telling the brain what we're doing, the sensory, so the brain can then control that reflex properly. So looking at our reflexes, our first ones are stretch reflexes. In response to stretching, the muscle will contract. That's what a stretch reflex does. Okay. So let me draw a craptacular picture, because I know you guys love them. Lie to me. Oh, yes, we love it when you draw crappy pictures. All right. So when you're sitting on the bed and your knee is bent, okay? When you bend your knee, what muscle group is contracting?
The hamstrings.
Hamstrings. When your hamstrings are contracting, what are the quads doing?
Stretching.
They're stretching, right? If you don't believe me, grab your ankle and pull. You definitely feel the stretch on those guys. So this is the setup for the stretch reflex. Is somebody's contracting, thus stretching the opposite group, the opposing group. And let's give us our spinal cord. All right. So what happens when we have our stretch reflexes? There's two types of stretches. We have the external stretch. This is what we feel. This is how we feel our muscle stretching with the external stretch. So lengthening of the entire muscle. This is what happens when you go to pick up something heavy and you can feel that little pull, that little stretch in your muscle right before it contracts. Or again, when the opposing group, the antagonistic muscle group is contracting. So when the hamstrings are contracting, we can feel the stretch in our quads. Internal stretch. This is the spies. They're primed. They're now informing on the muscle and that the muscle is stretching what we're doing. So stretching of the middle of the muscle by activating gamma motor neurons. So the intrafusal muscle fiber communication. So we don't feel the internal stretch. So when we do our stretch reflex, again, we get our little hammer and we hit on the patellar ligament right below the patella. This is going to cause a stretching of that ligament, and since those tendon all those connective structures are attached to the quads, it's going to slightly stretch that muscle, okay? Because when you poke something, it stretches, right?
Right.
Yes, when you poke saran wrap, it stretches. Everybody knows you poke the saran wrap. So that's going to send a signal to the spinal cord. So it's going to synapse within the spinal cord saying, dude, just hit me with a little hammer. And then you're going to have in the anterior great horn a somatic motor neuron that will be like, kick the fool. So it's going to go back to your quads, sending in EPSP, an excitatory postsynaptic potential. And that's going to cause the quads to contract. And when the quads contract, what happens?
Extension.
Extension. So we're going to kick the dog that just hit us with a little hammer. Okay? So that's your stretch reflex. In response to stretching, we will have a muscle contraction. So here's this chick. She looks very happy to be here. She was probably sitting in the waiting room for like 5 hours because doctors' offices are always behind. Isn't that mildly annoying? You're 10 minutes late, they charge you $75. They're 5 hours late. They're like, just enjoy the magazines. So here we are contracting, and we hit with the little hammer. And that's going to send a signal up to the spinal cord that says, dude, hit me with a hammer. You're going to have this somatic motor neuron that says, kick him, fool. And it's going to send a signal down to the quadriceps that's going to cause it to have a contraction, and contracting the quads is going to kick the knee forward. Now, when the quads contract, what do the hamstrings have to do?
Stretch. Wait, quads contract. Yeah, they stretch.
They're stretching, which would imply they have to do what to stretch? They were contracted, and you want to kick your quads, they've got to
release. They have to.
Okay, but when you're not contracting, it's called
relaxation.
Relaxing. Okay, so in order for this to happen properly, these guys are going to contract. These guys have to relax. Okay, if they don't, that's a problem, because if the hamstrings and the quads pull with the same force at the same time, what do you think is going to happen? If you had a big person and a little person both going for the last Hawaiian roll on the buffet, what's going to happen?
One of them's going to break.
Yeah. Which one usually breaks?
The hams. No,
The little person, right? Because the big person's going to smash them. So if you don't relax the hamstrings when the quads get in gear, they could rip the hamstrings. This is what happens when people pull hammies in sports. Their hamstring forgot to relax when their quads came in and did their thing. And the quads are way bigger. So it could actually just rip them if they don't relax properly.
And that's a nervous issue, or like a system with something going on with the nerves, not a chemical reaction in the brain?
Yep. When you pull a hammy, it's because you forgot to do the other reflex that says relax full.
So is it a combination of your nerves and your brain not being able to communicate fast enough?
Usually it's just because your muscle doesn't respond like it's supposed to because the reflex arc. When the hamstrings relax, when the quads start to contract, the brain isn't involved at all.
So you can say the muscles are a little too exhausted.
It's more along the lines, they forget to relax,
Okay.
so they get torn. So they miss their mark. So during this hit, you're going to have a second reflex. No reflex works alone. Kind of like even though you may have an assassin, the assassin usually has backup people to help them out do their job. So you're going to have this interneuron that sees that, oh my gosh, the quads are about to contract. I need to tell the hamstrings to relax so they don't damage themselves. So this interneuron will then synapse onto the somatic motor neuron that will then send an IPSP to the hamstrings so they relax. So you'll have this little guy that says, relax, fool, we're about to pull the quads, and we don't want to have damage. So if there's a problem between these two firing, this won't relax in time, and that's when you can pull a hammy. You'll see that happening sometimes. So these stretch reflexes, again, are ipsilateral, same side. You get hit on your left knee with a little hammer. It's the left knee that's going to kick you. And they are monosynaptic. All stretch reflexes are monosynaptic, sensory onto a motor. Now, the reflexes that inhibit the opposing muscle groups are always polysynaptic because there's an interneuron that says do the opposite. So that takes some thinking. And that's why sometimes those hammies get pulled, because a 2-neuron reflex can be much faster than a 3-neuron reflex. And if this guy is a split second too slow, they won't relax like they're supposed to. So sometimes it's just timing. It's just the quads go at it full force before the hamstrings can respond to it, and the hamstrings get damaged. There she is again, still getting hit with that little hammer. So here's the hit coming in. Here's the side reflex, the little interneuron that says, hey, relax, they're coming. And they're going to go tell the hamstrings to relax so they don't get damaged when the quadriceps pull. Now, stretch reflexes are necessary for normal muscle tone. When you're walking, when you have normal posture, you don't want to go too far forward, too far back, or anything like that, right? Or when you're walking forward, you want to make sure you're contracting and relaxing at very steady paces as you're moving along. Now, as mentioned, no reflexes ever act alone. We've got that primary stretch reflex that's getting all the glory, but we also have the opposing reflex for the hamstrings, or the antagonistic group. We will also have a gamma motor neuron reflex. This ensures that the neurons will keep sending information to the brain. The interfusal muscle fibers will keep sending information to the brain, so the brain knows what's going on. So these interfusal muscle fibers, as the muscle contracts, they fire less and less and less. And that's how the brain goes, oh, I haven't heard anything from this guy in a while. He must be very contracted. Okay, that's how we know what's going on. It's the rate of firing. So as they fire less and less, the brain is going to perceive that as, oh, I'm contracting. I need to pump the brakes. I need to slow the contraction of that muscle so we don't tear it. Okay, so we're going to have that reflex that goes along to help pump the brakes. So as the quads are contracting, they don't contract so much that they snap the knee up. Nobody wants to kick so hard that you hit your own thigh. Okay, so it's going to prevent us from having too much of that movement. Polysynaptic reflexes, so tendon reflexes. They have the opposite effect of a stretch reflex. So again, a stretch reflex, in response to stretching, the muscle will contract. So with a tendon reflex, in response to stretching, the muscle will
Twitch.
Okay. So stretch reflex, in response to stretching, the muscle will contract. The tendon reflex, which is the opposite, in response to stretching, the muscle will relax. Okay. So stretch reflex makes you contract. Tendon reflexes make you relax. Now they're called tendon reflexes because instead of the muscle spying and telling the brain that you're contracting, it's the tendon. Because when you're contracting on that muscle, you pull the tendon. And if the muscle contracts too much, it could rip and tear the tendon. And the tendon doesn't want that. So as that muscle is contracting, that tendon is going to say, stop pulling on me, it hurts. And it's going to eventually stop that contraction. It's going to cause muscle relaxation in response to that stretching. So these are going to come from the Golgi tendon organs. These are different sensory cells from the tendon versus from the muscle. So this prevents the muscle from overstretching, overcontracting, tearing tendons. Okay, so the stretch reflex helps us with the muscle preservation, and the tendon reflex helps us with the tendon preservation. Both of these reflexes are a little lacking when it comes to zombies. They're not getting those signals back, and the zombies can overcontract, either hurting them zombie cells, which they don't care because they're dead, or making them appear superhuman because they can do more because they're not concerned about injuring their body. Okay, so this is just showing you the Golgi tendon organs. Withdrawal reflex. Withdrawal reflexes are sometimes called flexor reflexes because you usually flex, right? When you withdraw, you flex. We're flexing my elbow, flexing my shoulder, that kind of stuff. So this happens oftentimes when we have a pain sensation. When we move our hand off of a hot stove, we're going to withdraw from that hot stove. We're going to flex away from that hot stove. So causing that automatic withdrawal. Now, withdrawal reflexes are always polysynaptic. There's an interneuron that says your hand's on fire, full move. And they're always ipsilateral, same size. Cross extension reflexes. This is a combination of ipsilateral and contralateral working. So if I raise my knee, okay, I've just contracted and now my foot is not on the ground. This guy withdrew, right? He flexed to get away from the ground, right? Yep, knee and hip had to flex to get away from the ground. What's the other leg got to do?
Relax. Say that again.
This withdrew. What does this leg got to do?
That withdrew, like pulled up?
Yeah, this pulled up.
Okay, that one's got to
What's this
perform
guy got to do?
plantar flexion. No. It's got to extend.
Yes, extend. Yay. It's really awkward if nobody answers because then eventually it doesn't work anymore. You fall over. Okay, it is going to extend. When this guy withdraws, he's got to extend down because if it doesn't extend, you buckle. Okay, you don't want to fall over. So it's a combination of ipsilateral withdrawal and contralateral extension reflex. Okay, this is going to help us to walk properly. So when we're walking, one withdraws, you put your weight on the other leg. You put your leg down, you withdraw that other leg, the other one has to have more weight on it. So you're going to be shifting your weight while you're walking so you can walk forward. This is also important if you're stepping on something so you don't hurt yourself too much. So here's this guy who's walking on a beach and steps on a glass bottle, which is why glass is usually banned on beaches because some idiot leaves glass around. So if we step on a piece of glass, we start bleeding, the shark gets excited. That's painful. We're going to withdraw from that. So this side says pull away from the sharp, stabby thing on your foot. And we're going to contract the group so we can withdraw away from that pain. At that same point, you're going to have interneurons that are going to be like, all right, those guys are about to withdraw. We better extend so we don't fall over because we don't want to move away from that pain and lose balance and fall to the side because there might be more glass or stickers or shark trying to get us. Okay, so these two guys, especially with the lower limbs, when you're walking, you're always going to have withdrawal and contralateral or cross extension reflexes happening at the same time. And then our superficial reflexes. So instead of looking at what the muscles are doing, what the tendons are doing, we're looking at what the skin is experiencing. So these are due to cutaneous stimulation. And one of our classic example, again, is that plantar reflex that we just saw in lab. So downward flexion of the toes while the sole is stroked. Okay, so your toes curl when somebody tickles your feet. Okay, that's going to be the normal plantar reflex. Babinski sign, normal in infants because they're not fully myelinated yet. They don't know how to control their body. So when you go to tickle their feet, their toes will flare instead of curling. Okay, so whenever you have kids, the first few months and years of checkups are checking a lot of those reflexes. When they go from flare, Babinski sign, to plantar flexion, plantar reflex, that means they're ready to start crawling and walking properly. So that's something the doctors are going to look at. Now, in adults, it's completely abnormal. It means that there's been some kind of damage. We either have damage to the corticospinal tract, going from the lower limbs up the spinal cord to the brain, or we have damage to the motor cortex. Okay, so when somebody has a car accident, they start doing lots of different reflex tests. So they'll do things like the plantar reflex. And if our toes flare, they know to go look in this part of the brain that would control the lower limbs, then look at this part of the spinal cord that's going to have the tracts that go to the lower limbs, check the sciatic nerve, that kind of scenario. If our toes curl, good news, that track is fine. Then they move up to the next reflex and the next reflex and the next reflex. That way they can pinpoint or narrow where exactly damage might be in the spinal cord, where exactly damage might be in the brain. Okay, so Babinski sign, normal in infants until they're ready to start walking, but completely abnormal in adults. Another type of superficial reflex is the abdominal reflex. Light stroking of the abs will cause them to twitch, right? When someone goes to tickle your tummy, you're like, stop tickling my tummy. Anybody else twitchy abs? Go tickle somebody, tell them you're testing. Okay, they twitch, okay? Because they don't like it, they're touchies. Oh, conditions, are you excited? Yay, the end is near. All right. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, so this used to be called Lou Gehrig's disease because some baseball player, Lou Gehrig, got it and they named it after him. And of course, as we've been talking about all along, we're changing a lot of names from we've named it to honor a person to naming it after something anatomical. So instead of we got to say things like amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Okay. Most people just know about this disease because of the whole water bucket challenge a few years ago. Remember that back in the day when people started dumping water buckets on you on social media?
Yes.
Okay. A lot of people don't realize there was a reason for that other than just throwing water. So it started with the foundation. They said, okay, they had certain groups of people that like, you could either, one, pay us $50 for ALS research and walk away, or pay us $10 and we're to dump water on your head. And the reason why they were saying dumping cold water, because dumping cold water makes you very frozen, like you're paralyzed. And that's what this disease does, is it paralyzes you. So they were trying to mimic that in a fun way. So at first it was supposed to be to raise money. And before long, everybody was dumping water on everybody else, and very few people actually donated to the ALS Society. So it was really popular socially, but as a fundraiser, it was kind of an epic fail. Because everyone's like, why are you dumping water? I don't know, it's sounded cool, throw some water. But that's why the water challenge happened. They were trying to raise money. So what happens, we have a progressive destruction of the anterior horns. And again, the anterior horns are where we find all the cell bodies of the somatic motor neurons. So if you kill all the neurons that go to your skeletal muscles don't work anymore. So you're going to get progressive weakness of the muscle. So that's some of the early stages, is being very tired, very weak, can't move very well. And eventually you get bigger and bigger paralysis in the muscles as the spinal cord is disintegrating. It also will affect the pyramidal tracts. So the tracts are actually going up to the brain as well. Towards the latter stages of the disease, you're going to lose the ability to talk. You're going to lose the ability to eat. You'll have to be put on a mechanical respirator. Surviving ALS is basically due to money. If you've got money to pay for a mechanical respirator and a private nurse to feed you and clothe you and wipe you down and take care of you, you can live for quite a long time. This is what Stephen Hawking had. And that man was very, very rich. So he had the best little motorized scooter going around with a built-in mechanical respirator for him. And he could blink out all his little physical things to talk about string theory and crap. Now, the normal person who can't afford all the bling that he was able to medically, you're looking at about 2 years. So this is always fatal, and you've got about a 2-year span once you're diagnosed before you die of it.
Is that the same symptoms as polio?
Yep. The difference is the destruction is more widespread in ALS, and it's not viral like polio. So that would be one of the first things they would do is do a lumbar puncture. And if you find polio virus in your CSF, you got polio. If you don't see that virus, then it's probably this guy.
Luke Erickson?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Speak of the devil, polio virus. So poliomyelitis, this is a destruction of the anterior horns by the polio virus. Again, the big difference, it doesn't affect the brain like ALS will affect the brain. So it produces paralysis. Now, it can be isolated. There are people who got polio and it only affected the lower part of the spinal column. So they may be put in a wheelchair. They may have muscle weakness in their legs. If it hits the neck region, that's usually when it becomes fatal, because if it hits the phrenic nerve, you can't breathe. And that's when we started seeing all the little kids in the iron lungs in the 50s and 60s to breathe for them. So again, very devastating and oftentimes fatal if it spreads throughout the entire spinal cord. If they can stop it and isolate it in one spot, then you're just going to have localized damage. So that's what happened with FDR. So he had severe polio and it paralyzed him from the waist down. This is one of the reasons why when you see pictures of FDR, he's usually just riding in a car. You don't see him doing a lot of stuff, because back in the day, people respected the president's office and they didn't air out their dirty laundry. Okay. Today, if this would have happened, Hitler would have found out he had polio before the rest of us would have. Okay. Now, it was a big deal because we didn't want to appear weak in World War II, right? Right, because Hitler had a habit of trying to kill things that were weak or different. Okay. So he had this condition. It was well hidden, and most people didn't know that he had or survived polio until closer to the end of World War II. Shingles, chickenpox, herpes. So we talked about this one yesterday, right? Our Chihuahuas, Great Danes, and Rottweilers. So you have the herpes virus that lives in the dorsal root ganglion. Once you got it forever. So once you've got that virus, you're going to basically just keep it suppressed. So this is where there oftentimes is confusion. You'll hear people say that, oh, they've got shingles, but it's not going to be infectious. It's like, yeah, it's always infectious, but if you've already got the chickenpox virus living in your body, you can't catch it again because you've already got it. Okay, so I could be around somebody with a shingles outbreak because I had chickenpox as a kid. I'm not going to get anything. That doesn't mean their shingles isn't going to make other people sick, but it doesn't work on me because I've already got it. Okay, so it is still transmittable. So if you have a 6-year-old person that comes down with shingles and you bring your 2-year-old child around them and they're not fully vaccinated, they get the chickenpox, which is what they used to do back in the day before we had vaccines for chickenpox. There were chickenpox parties where you had one sick kid and everybody came and rubbed on them. You're like, get it all now. Because it's better to get it when you're younger before you're fully myelinated. That's why chickenpox is itchy. Itch is a precursor to pain. Shingles hurts because you're fully myelinated, so you get the full feeling of that virus spreading down and stimulating that sensory nerve all the way through the dermatome to do those blisters. And those blisters are how the virus spreads, just like mushrooms are how mushrooms reproduce. So when you see somebody with the blisters, that's that virus is just trying to give it up to whoever will take it. So nowadays, again, you can get the shingles. Unfortunately, they call it a shingles vaccine for older people. It's not a true vaccine because vaccine prevents you from getting a disease. When you've got shingles, you've already had it. So when you get the shingles vaccine as an older adult, it's not truly a vaccine. It's not preventing you from getting it. It's helping keep it suppressed that's already in your immune. So it's improving your immune responses. So it's not a true vaccine. So it's a misname. A lot of drugs do this. Valtrex. There's a lot of, Abreva. You can put Abreva all over your shingles. That would just be very expensive, right? Yeah, if you've had cold sores, you know the teeniest, tiniest thing of Abreva costs like $20. There's no way you're wasting that on your shingles. It'll take forever. But it's all the same thing. Once you got it, you got it. You just try to keep it suppressed for the rest of your life and hope that it doesn't pop up and ruin your day. So it lives in those dorsal roots in the spinal column as well as in the cranial nerves. Meningitis, itis, inflammation of the meninges, lots of forms, bacterial, viral, fungal, all that kind of fun stuff. We're just going to look at the two types based on location. So pachymeningitis, pachy means hard, like a pachycephalosaurus is that hard-headed dinosaur, the head-butting dinosaurs, or pachyderm, elephants have hard skin. So that is meningitis of the dura mater, so the furthest one out. This one doesn't cause as much damage because it's not in direct contact with the nervous tissue. Leptomeningitis, lepto meaning scales. So leptopterans is the order butterflies and moths are in because they have scaled wings. This meningitis affects the delicate scale-like parts of the meninges, the pia mater and the arachnoid matter. This, unfortunately, is the most common form that we have. And of course, being in contact with the neural tissue, this is the one that can be fatal within 24 hours of diagnosis because it touches that. This is why most of you probably got the vaccine against meningitis before coming to AC. And if you didn't, you probably signed a waiver saying, I'm an adult and I don't want to get a vaccine. Right? In theory, yeah, something along those lines. It's not as important at AC because we don't live in dorms. You usually see meningitis spread through dorms because everybody's sharing everything in dorms and you get it from spit. Okay, so stay away from people and their spit activities. Epidural block affects the area right around where you shoot up the epidural space with numbing agent so you can't feel things. So hopefully it works for you if you get pregnant and have kids. Sometimes they don't work and then it's very upsetting that you have to feel them. Don't have kids. And we survived with 2 minutes to spare.
Nice.
Just in case you thought we weren't going to make it. We made it.